Tonight's tale, The Ghost's Cap, comes from Short and Shivery, 45 Chilling Tales, retold by Robert D. Souci. In a certain village there was a girl who was as full of mischief as she was lazy. Though her mother and father would nag at her to help with the cooking or mending or sweeping, she would slip away to meet with her friends, who were as useless as she was. They would sit on the banks of the river, gossiping and chattering away, while their mothers washed the clothes and spread them on the bank to dry near the churchyard. One day Anya and her friends began talking about who was the boldest. The boasting went on and on, until Anya finally declared, "I'm not afraid of anything." "Well then," said one young man, Ivan, "if you're not afraid, go at midnight to the graveyard. My father and uncle say there's a ghost who sits on a tombstone there from the stroke of midnight until the first light of dawn. Go, make the ghost tell you its name, and I'll believe that no one is as brave as you. And I'll give you the silver buttons off my jacket that you've admired for so long." "Oh, those?" said the greedy girl with a toss of her braid. "I'd have to have more than them to go to the churchyard at midnight and meet a ghost." In fact, she did not believe there was any ghost, because she knew that the young man's father and uncle were notorious for the amount of vodka they drank. They were often seeing spirits in the night after they downed too many glasses of liquor. "If you'll do it, I'll give you 2 lengths of lace," said one girl. "And I'll give you 20 kopecks," offered another girl. Soon Anya had extracted promises for all sorts of things from her friends. She vowed to go to the graveyard that very night, at the stroke of midnight, and force the ghost to tell her its name. When she went home that evening, her mother grumbled, "The dust is piling up in the corners of every room because you won't do your sweeping." "Soon," said Anya, taking out her favorite embroidered jacket and beginning to cut off the wooden buttons, thinking of how grand Ivan's silver ones would look on their stead. Her father cleared his throat impatiently. "You'd be better off learning to cook a decent meal and do an honest day's work than worrying about how you look. You'll die a pauper in rags if you don't have a care." "Never," said the girl, thinking about the lace and kopecks and other things her cleverness would win her that night. Her parents just threw their hands in the air and shook their heads at each other. Shortly before midnight, when her mother and father were asleep, Anya pulled on her shawl and slipped out of the cottage. She planned to walk to the edge of the churchyard because she was sure some of her friends would be watching from their windows to see that she was doing as she promised. When she got there, she intended to turn right around and come home. In the morning, she would tell her friends that the ghost was the ghost of old Peter, who had died the spring before. That would satisfy them, and they would have to give her all the things they had promised. So she strolled to the crumbling, low stone wall around the cemetery. She pushed her way through the rustling gate. The full moon shone brightly, filling the place with a pale light. Just inside, she saw what looked like a corpse dressed in white from head to foot sitting on a tombstone. Anya wasn't the least bit afraid. She thought it was Ivan playing a trick on her. So she ran up to the figure and, pulling the cap off it, shouted, "You won't frighten me." The ghostly figure held its peace, never uttering a word. "Are you a ghost waiting for the stroke of midnight to speak?" she teased. "Or are you a boy who will have no silver buttons on his jacket in the morning?" Laughing, she ran back through the moon-splashed streets. When she got home, she looked closer at her prize and found it was a moldy white cap, half filled with loose earth. "Ugh!" she cried, tossing it into a dusty corner of her room. Then she blew out the candle and climbed into bed. 3 times she came awake, thinking she heard something tapping on the window. In the rising wind, she thought she heard a voice whispering, "Give me back my cap! Give me back my cap!" But each time she relit the candle and threw open the shutters, she discovered only darkness. Finally, she slept soundly until morning. The next day, she met her friends at the river bank. She told them she had gone to the churchyard the night before, and the 2 girls admitted they'd been spying on her, and had indeed seen her walking down the lane toward the cemetery. "Did you meet the ghost?" said Ivan. "To be sure," Anya said, It's the spirit of old Peter, who died last spring. He told me so himself, and then I snatched his cap as proof, and here it is." She held out the dirt-stained cap, enjoying the way her friend shuddered and pulled away from the trophy. Only Ivan stretched out a finger to touch it. Anya tossed it at him, but he jerked away, so it fell onto the grass between them. "Don't you want your cap back?" she teased, "since you lost it last night?" "I have never seen that thing before," said Ivan, but he reached into his pocket and dropped the silver jacket buttons into Anya's cupped hands. "You're a liar," she laughed, "but you pay your debts like an honest man." Then she gathered up the rest of her prizes from her friends and hurried back home to hide them away. She paused only long enough to crumple the white cap into a ball and toss it into the river. That night, long after everyone was asleep, in the hour just before dawn, there came an angry tapping on the shutter of Anya's bedroom window. "Give me back my cap!" the voice moaned. But the girl, sleeping heavily and dreaming of silver buttons and lace, never woke up. But her mother did, and woke Anya's father. They opened a window and saw a ghastly figure in the moonlight. "What do you want?" asked the mother, trembling. "My cap, which your daughter stole." Just at that moment, the cocks began to crow and the ghost disappeared. Anya's parents woke her up. "Foolish girl, what have you done?" demanded her father, and then he told her what he and her mother had seen from the window. "It's only Ivan," said Anya, pulling the bedclothes up around her head. "He's always playing tricks." Her parents pleaded with her to give back the cap, but she said that she had tossed it into the river on the way home, and that was that. Alarmed, the girl's father and mother sent for the village priest, told them about their horrible visitor, and begged him to help. "You can perform a service to rid us of this ghost, can't you?" The priest considered for a while, and then told them to bring their daughter to church the next day. So, on the following day, Anya was dragged to church, protesting loudly that she had buttons and lace to sew onto her favorite coat. The priest had asked a number of villagers to come add their prayers to help lay the troubled spirit to rest. Just as the service was nearly finished, a terrible whirlwind arose. The entire church was shaken, and everyone was hurled to the floor. But Anya was thrown down with an even greater force. A single, blood-curdling scream escaped from her lips. Then everything was silent, and the whirlwind stilled. But when the terrified people picked themselves up and looked toward the altar, there on the bottom step, where Anya had been kneeling, was nothing but a single braid of her hair and one silver jacket button.